On January 27, 2026, at 05:34 hours, the USS Abraham Lincoln experienced something unprecedented. Its navigation systems started giving impossible readings. GPS coordinates jumped hundreds of kilometers in seconds. Communication channels degraded to static. Over the next 72 hours, the world's most powerful warship would operate effectively blind in some of the planet's most dangerous waters. What happened wasn't a missile strike or a traditional attack. It was something far more subtle, insidious, and modern. Iran had turned electronic warfare into a weapon capable of paralyzing a 100,000-ton nuclear carrier without firing a single shot. Just 3 weeks before, the Lincoln was conducting routine freedom of navigation patrols in the South China Sea, thousands of miles from the Persian Gulf. Its strike group included 60 fighter aircraft, 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and 5,000 sailors, all operating at peak readiness. But following massive protests in Iran that killed over 5,000 people, the U.S. administration issued a direct warning. Further executions would trigger a military response that would dwarf prior strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. By January 6th, the carrier had received orders to transit immediately to the Middle East, unknowingly entering a trap months in the making. Iran had been preparing for this scenario for 8 months. Military planners meticulously studied the Lincoln's electronic capabilities, including the EA-18G Growlers equipped with the advanced ALQ-249 next-generation jamming systems. These aircraft could blind radars across hundreds of miles, jam communications, deceive missiles, and create electronic chaos. But Iran had acquired a comparable capability. Russian transport aircraft had delivered Mormons BN electronic warfare systems to Tehran in August 2024. These were among the most powerful jamming platforms in the world, capable of targeting systems across 5,000 to 8,000 kilometers, enough to threaten the Lincoln even before it reached Iranian waters. The journey from the South China Sea to the Arabian Sea took 21 days. During that time, Iran built a complete electronic blueprint of the Lincoln's capabilities. On January 26th, the carrier entered the U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility, approximately 660 kilometers from the Iranian coastline. That evening, an Iranian SFP-2501 drone appeared on radar, flickering in and out to complicate tracking. The drone never entered international thresholds requiring interception. It circled for hours, cataloging radar frequencies, communication channels, and GPS signals, mapping the Lincoln's electromagnetic signature. The first act of the attack wasn't explosive. It was digital reconnaissance, laying the groundwork for a precision electronic strike. On January 27th at 05:34, the attack began. Iranian electronic warfare teams activated coordinated jamming against GPS satellites. GPS signals are inherently weak, designed for civilian use, but Iran's Mormons BN systems generated interference thousands of times stronger, flooding specific frequencies. This technique, called barrage jamming, overwhelmed satellite signals, leaving the carrier's navigation blind. Within seconds, the Lincoln's coordinates began to drift, showing it hundreds of kilometers off position. Backup systems engaged, but the effects cascaded. Aircraft navigation, targeting systems, encrypted communications, and strike group data links, all dependent on precise GPS timing, started failing. The carrier's digital nervous system was thrown into chaos. Commander Jensen in the Combat Information Center issued an urgent order at 05:48 hours, activate River City protocols. This highest-level communications lockdown shut down all non-essential digital emissions. Wi-Fi, personal satellite phones, social media, and email were cut off. The goal was twofold: reduce the carrier's electromagnetic signature and preserve bandwidth for critical mission operations. For 5,000 sailors aboard, the outside world vanished. Iran wasn't finished. At 06:12 hours, a second wave targeted communications, focusing on the frequencies used by the air wing to coordinate with command centers. Data uploads failed, maps froze mid-download, and frequency hopping techniques proved useless. At 06:43 hours, the Lincoln launched EA-18G Growlers to locate and neutralize Iranian jammers. These aircraft, armed with ALQ-249 pods, could deliver powerful counter-jamming beams. But Iran had adopted mobile strategies from the Ukraine conflict. Their Mormons BN systems were truck-mounted, constantly relocating. By the time the Growlers calculated a jamming source, It had already moved 15 kilometers. Aircraft burned fuel chasing ghosts. Meanwhile, at 0721, an FA-18 Super Hornet returning to the carrier lost GPS completely during landing. With only visual cues, it managed a successful touchdown with just 8 minutes of fuel remaining, a narrow escape that revealed the true danger the crew faced. The Lincoln was no longer just being jammed. It was isolated. Satellite navigation, encrypted communications, and precision timing were degraded. Iran had created an A2AD bubble, anti-access, area denial, so dense that even advanced systems struggled to operate. At 08:00, Captain Morrison made a crucial decision. The Lincoln would not retreat. Retreating would signal defeat. Instead, the carrier adapted. Navigation shifted to inertial and celestial systems. Communications moved to lower frequencies. Flight operations were restricted to daylight hours, reducing GPS dependency. In essence, the strike group regressed 40 years technologically, operating as sailors did before the age of satellites. While the Lincoln adapted, commercial shipping in the region faced crisis. The Strait of Hormuz, just 300 kilometers west, is only 21 meters wide at its narrowest point and carries 20% of global petroleum consumption daily. GPS jamming forced ships to rely on radar and visual navigation, slowing transit dramatically. Within 24 hours, over 900 vessels reported impossible positions, appearing on land or hundreds of kilometers off course. On January 28th, 2 tankers collided in darkness near the strait entrance. GPS interference was identified as a primary factor. Navigation failure in one of the world's most critical shipping lanes became a stark reality. Later that day, an Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boat approached within 2 kilometers of the USS Frank E. Peterson, an escort destroyer. Normally, the destroyer's radar would track the patrol boat's position, speed, and heading with perfect precision, but GPS degradation caused erratic readings. The crew faced an impossible decision: wait for better data and risk surprise, or act on flawed information. The patrol boat eventually turned away, highlighting electronic warfare's deadliest feature: ambiguity. Systems weren't destroyed, but operators couldn't trust them. In the fog of electronic war, uncertainty itself became a weapon. By January 29th, the Lincoln had operated under GPS denial for 48 hours. Fuel consumption rose 15% due to inefficient routing, flight operations dropped 40%, and communication with shore bases slowed dramatically. Despite reduced effectiveness, the carrier remained operational. Iranian state media acknowledged exercises but never admitted jamming. The message was clear: Iran could disrupt U.S. operations without a missile or pilot, using only electronic tools. Inside the Pentagon, debate raged: retaliate and risk escalation, or adapt and endure. The strategic reality became evident. Electronic warfare couldn't be bombed away. It had to be outsmarted. The breakthrough came from SpaceX engineers monitoring satellite networks. They proposed using Starlink satellites to triangulate positions independently of GPS, employing multilateration. This bypassed Iranian jamming entirely. By January 30th, Starlink units were flown to the carrier via Osprey transport aircraft. Installation began immediately. By afternoon, positioning accuracy returned within 10 meters, restoring safe navigation and carrier operations. The system bypassed traditional GPS frequencies entirely. What the Lincoln's crew realized was profound. Iran's sophisticated jamming targeted conventional military systems, but adapting alternative commercial technology neutralized the threat. Electronic warfare was powerful, but not invincible. By January 31st, Iranian jamming abruptly ceased. GPS signals returned, communication channels cleared, and navigation systems resynchronized. Iran offered no public statement of success or failure. The silent withdrawal spoke volumes. It demonstrated capability and restraint. Analysts drew 3 key lessons. GPS remains a critical vulnerability. Electronic warfare is inherently escalatory, creating a cycle of countermeasures. And the Strait of Hormuz is more exposed than ever. Even temporary interference caused chaos, showing that modern economic and military systems are dependent on weak satellite signals, creating vulnerabilities that adversaries can exploit without firing a shot. The Lincoln remained in the region for another week before relief arrived. During this time, operations normalized. But strategic assumptions had shifted. Iran now knew it could disrupt carrier operations via electronic warfare. The U.S. understood it must plan for GPS denial as a baseline, not an exception. Commercial shipping companies, insurers, and energy markets learned that the Strait of Hormuz could be disrupted electronically, far beyond conventional military threat. Electronic interference could jeopardize global oil flows quietly but effectively. One of the most critical global choke points had become an electromagnetic battlefield. After-action reports revealed that during the 72-hour jamming period, the Lincoln operated at only 60% capacity. Navigation slowed, flight operations reduced, and communications degraded, yet 60% of a U.S. carrier strike group still represents overwhelming firepower. Iran's electronic warfare had impressed but not decisively defeated the U.S. Navy. This distinction mattered. Carriers can operate under duress, launching strikes and defending themselves. For Iran, the calculus became whether temporary disruption justified provoking retaliation. For the U.S., it became a question of sustainability. Can operations in contested electromagnetic zones continue indefinitely, or do deployments require additional resources and technology to maintain capability? No shots were fired, no lives were lost, no territory changed hands, yet a confrontation had occurred, fought entirely in the electromagnetic spectrum. Iran had created a dead zone in which advanced military technology faltered. The U.S. demonstrated rapid adaptation, integrating alternative navigation systems and operational workarounds. Both sides retained their capabilities, but assumptions shifted. The age of uncontested GPS was over. Electronic warfare had entered the forefront of strategic deterrence. The Strait of Hormuz, already a global oil choke point, had become its most contested electromagnetic battlefield. The era of silent, high-stakes digital conflict had begun. For the sailors aboard the Lincoln, operating blind left an indelible impression. Systems once trusted completely failed. GPS, communications, and timing synchronization all degraded. They experienced modern warfare without explosives, without visible threats, and yet under extreme danger. The challenge tested skill, training, and adaptability more than any missile or torpedo could. Human judgment became the only guarantee. The incident underscored a fundamental truth. Technology can be both an advantage and a vulnerability. Even the world's most advanced warship is dependent on the people who operate it, particularly when the systems it relies on suddenly fail. In the months that followed, the Pentagon and allied militaries studied the incident in detail. Electronic warfare courses incorporated the Lincoln scenario as a case study. The event highlighted multi-domain operations, where conflicts span both physical and digital realms simultaneously. Modern war isn't always kinetic. Sometimes it occurs entirely in invisible spectrums. Decision-making under uncertainty, redundancy, alternative systems, and improvisation became central lessons. The Lincoln incident demonstrated that the electromagnetic spectrum can be a primary battlefield. Success depends not solely on technology, but on the ability to adapt under its failure. The strategic implications extended globally. Israel examined its reliance on GPS-guided munitions and demanded inertial-only guidance alternatives. Saudi Arabia accelerated expansion of east-west pipelines to bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely. The economic impacts were immediate. Marine insurance rates rose, underwriters reassessed risk, and tanker companies implemented backup navigation systems previously considered obsolete. A $2 increase in insurance translated to roughly 4 cents per gallon globally. Iran had found a cost-effective way to influence the global oil market without controlling a single barrel. Electronic warfare, even temporary, had become a tool of strategic leverage. Russia and China observed closely. A fraction of the Lincoln strike group represented $25 billion in hardware, training, and logistics. Iran's electronic warfare systems cost a fraction of that, perhaps $400 million, and degraded the carrier's capabilities significantly. The return on investment for Iran was staggering, with minimal cost and risk. They forced the U.S. Navy to adapt operations, highlighting asymmetric advantages in modern warfare. For potential adversaries, the lesson was clear. Electronic warfare is a cost-effective, strategically transformative capability. The Lincoln incident became a blueprint for how small, agile forces can challenge superpowers in the digital domain. Following the incident, the U.S. Navy prioritized development of jam-resistant systems. Contracts worth $23 billion were awarded to produce technology capable of operating fully without GPS, resisting simultaneous jamming across frequencies, and deployable without extensive ship modifications. Initial prototypes were due within 18 months, with full production in 3 years. The Pentagon treated electronic warfare as a higher priority than hypersonics, cyber attacks, or drones. Because all other systems depend on satellite-based positioning and communication, vulnerabilities fully exposed by the Lincoln incident. The event accelerated technological innovation and reshaped military procurement strategy globally. Iran, meanwhile, did not rest on its success. Reports from March and April 2026 indicated frequent electronic warfare exercises, simulations, and coordination drills. These exercises refined targeting algorithms, multi-site coordination, and operational doctrine. Electronic warfare became standard operating procedure, not an exceptional measure. Every unit near the Gulf was trained to operate in an electronically contested environment. Iran was integrating these tactics into its military DNA. The Lincoln episode was not a one-off demonstration. It was the opening salvo of a new form of asymmetric deterrence, demonstrating how a small force can achieve strategic influence against a superpower without firing a shot. The broader lesson extended beyond hardware. Military power increasingly depends on infrastructure that can be disrupted without physical destruction. GPS satellites, while invulnerable to traditional attack, can be jammed at low cost. Communication networks rely on choke points. Sophisticated technology creates dependencies, and those dependencies become vulnerabilities. The Pentagon coined the term critical, non-kinetic dependencies to describe essential systems that cannot be defended conventionally. Electronic warfare cannot be countered with missiles. Only redundancy, alternative methods, and the ability to operate without infrastructure protect against such threats. Modern militaries must balance capability with resilience. For the crew of the Lincoln, life returned to routine, but the memory lingered. Operating blind, relying on skill and improvisation, they had experienced the vulnerability inherent in dependence on technology. The dead zone lasted 3 days, but the lessons endured. It emphasized that human adaptability, training, and decision-making remain paramount. Even the most advanced warship, with all its electronics and firepower, is ultimately dependent on its crew's ability to function under degraded conditions. Technology enhances, but it cannot replace human judgment. The incident also reshaped naval training. Exercises now routinely simulate GPS-denied environments. Crews practice communication without data links and flight operations without satellite timing. Electronic warfare, once a niche capability, is now treated as a central domain of conflict, equivalent to air or sea superiority. Commanders and sailors alike learned that preparation for electronic denial isn't optional, it's survival. The lessons of January 2026 will influence operations for decades. Every carrier deployment near Iranian waters now assumes potential jamming as a baseline condition, and strategy must account for it in advance. The dead zone highlighted a paradox of modern warfare. The more technologically advanced a system, the more damage a targeted disruption can inflict. Iran had no missiles, no planes, and no physical attack, yet it forced the Lincoln into operating at 60% capacity. Electronic warfare can amplify vulnerability and shift the cost-benefit balance dramatically in favor of a smaller, agile adversary. The Lincoln survived, but the encounter redefined assumptions about how wars are fought in the 21st century. The most dangerous attacks may be silent, invisible, and intangible, hitting weaknesses that no conventional weapon can reach. Strategically, the encounter changed calculations globally. Alternative energy infrastructure became more than economic projects. They became strategic insurance. Israel accelerated inertial guidance development. The U.S. modernized strike groups to resist jamming. Commercial insurers reassessed risk. All players realized that control of electromagnetic space is as critical as controlling the seas. Iran had proven it could create disruption, uncertainty, and ambiguity across multiple domains simultaneously. Electronic warfare became both a shield and a weapon, a tool of deterrence, and a means to project influence without conventional conflict. Ultimately, The Lincoln's escape from the dead zone was not victory in the traditional sense. It was survival. The crew adapted, systems were modified, and operations continued, but lessons remained. Iran had demonstrated capability, and the U.S. had demonstrated resilience. Both sides learned, both sides adjusted, and the assumptions about naval operations in the Persian Gulf were permanently altered. The age of uncontested GPS was over. Electronic warfare had entered the strategic mainstream as a domain where battles could be fought and influence projected without firing a shot. For the sailors aboard, the 72-hour ordeal was unforgettable. They had operated blind, with familiar systems failing, and faced unseen threats. They had learned to rely on fundamental skills, improvisation, and teamwork. The incident underscored a timeless truth. Technology is a tool, not a guarantee. The most sophisticated warship cannot operate without skilled operators capable of managing failure. Electronic warfare magnifies this reality. Silent, invisible, and insidious attacks test human skill as much as hardware. Modern combat is often won or lost in the unseen spectrums, where operators adapt faster than their adversaries can exploit them. The USS Abraham Lincoln survived Iran's dead zone, adapting to GPS denial, communication degradation, and electronic interference. Yet the strategic landscape had shifted irrevocably. Iran had proven asymmetric influence through minimal investment. The U.S. had adapted to maintain mission capability. The Strait of Hormuz would remain a contested electromagnetic battlefield. Every future deployment would assume GPS denial as a baseline. Electronic warfare was no longer secondary. It was central. The Lincoln's experience illustrated a paradox. Reliance on advanced technology can create vulnerability, and survival depends on the ability to operate effectively when that technology fails. The silent war in the spectrum had begun.